So Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So there's many questions that arises from this opening statement in the Bible, the introduction scene. It says in the beginning. First question is, when was the beginning? Then we see God created. And the author is now introducing God, just God created. And his introduction is almost an assumption that we will now have a concept of God. The reality is that humanity could not and was not and did not come into existence separate from a concept of God. So to humanity, God should not need an introduction, and there should have never been a need for an explanation to come with the word God. Shows you the depravity of our times. It's a beautiful start to the Bible. It's a beautiful illustration of the way that things should have been. The way that the Bible just starts. No context to the fact that they are going to speak about God. No introduction, no explanation, because humanity did not come into being without the clear presence and existence of God. The first thing humanity knew was God. When Adam opened his eyes, it was the first thing that he saw. His beholding was God. Light and life started for Adam with God. The first thing that Adam knew was God. All other things came after. For man, remember that Adam represents the beginning of us all, the starting place of us all. Adam represents in the Bible all of us. Humanity, humankind, can be summed up in the word Adam. Adam is not a name. Adam is a concept, a constant. Adam is the man. And Adam comes into existence with the knowledge of God and no knowledge of anything without God. There is a void, a nothingness, where today we have the concepts of no God, another God, not knowing God, being unsure about God, all of that space that's filled to the brim with concepts today in the human psyche, that was a void in Adam's psyche. There was nothing there. All he knew, all he saw when his eyes opened, the first light that entered his brain, his psyche, his knowledge, his receptors, the first thing that entered his receptors was the face of God slowly drawing back from his. The context of all other things is revealed as God's face draws away from his, and other things comes into his visual perception. When he opens his eyes, his sight, his eyes' sight, his vision is filled with one thing, the presence of God. For him, the beginning of all things was the presence of God, filling his sight. As his eyes flickered open and the bright light filled his newly created eyes, must have been kind of blinding, those first moments where there was nothing. And then Adam. See, if you place yourself in that place where we're not looking at Adam from the outside, don't try and imagine him lying there on the ground. See from where he is, his perspective. When we concentrate on just looking at me looking out, if I look straight ahead of me, with my hands behind me, I can't see myself. You can't really see your eyelids. You just see everything else. And everything that he saw and knew and got to know, everything that was so bright and amazing and overwhelming, at first was just God's face, God's presence. And we don't know what that is. But God had to physically manifest himself in some way to breathe into Adam's lungs the breath of life. He had to physically manifest himself in some way to form Adam with his own hands from the red soil of the earth. I wonder if a finger of God was still lingering somewhere on his arm when he woke up. I wonder if there was a touch. I'd like to think so. Just that last touch before God's hand withdrew. I don't know, any child of God would immediately have a longing for that possibility. And then God's hand withdrew. Adam was formed. And he slowly moved away. And Adam came into being. Probably squinting a little bit, bright out here. Imagine waking up from nothingness into full consciousness. Not like a baby having to learn. A man who knows. Where we all started. No concept existed of no God or not knowing God. There was no such concept. As a matter of fact, life began with full knowledge and revelation of God. Without doctrine, no doctrine, just full revelation of Yahweh. No doctrine to explain it. The face, the glory, the life, the breath, the light. That is Yahweh. That's why it's so astounding to look at these words. You open the Bible, the book written to reveal him. The only source that is in existence to help you understand you, the only source in existence to give context to why you are here. Without this book, we would have nothing. Without this book, without the words that's in here, you would exist, and your existence would be as if you didn't exist. Because without the knowledge of who created you, without the knowledge of the why he created you, without the knowledge of who he says you are, if you have none of that, then what would humanity be? What would a man or a woman be? So, humanity would have no other option. Humanity would only be left with fable, legend, imagination, all of their own creation. Humanity would be left with the knowledge only of what they have created, if they didn't have the knowledge of who created them. And billions and billions of questions. It's a scary, a very lost place without this book. We look at the first line. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And this brings with it so many questions. But the questions matter less than the enormous answer that is given. This answer, what is written here, the answer that is provided, feels like the very foundation of sanity. It feels like the very foundation of reasoning. God created. Yes, we might go on a journey to try and understand those words, God created. It'll take a journey. It'll take a lifetime of seeking, finding out, discovering, living. You will only ever know what it means if you get to live the revelation of this. You cannot study and understand, you have to live the revelation of God created. The universe. I don't care what that is. The universe is a big place, and humanity without God, they tend to keep themselves busy with trying to understand the universe. The heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So what we know is that it says Yahweh created the heavens and the earth, and except for the existence of Yahweh and the information we have about the earth was void, without form. There was the presence of one other thing, darkness. Darkness was there. Now, understanding void is impossible. Understanding without form is by its very nature Not possible. Draw, you can draw, you can paint. Draw a picture of without form for me. What is that? My brain cannot do anything with that information. I know what the opposite of it is, and in that way I've learned something, that it is not form or formed. So with void and without form, my brain can still do nothing. The piece of information that's valid is there was darkness. Every time I really think about it, it scares me. It scares me in a deep, deep, deep place. It's darkness that is so full of terror. It is in total darkness that we know we are hopeless. We all know they make scary movies out of someone getting stuck in a very deep underground cavern with tunnels. And if you don't have light, you can feel your way touching the sides and the rocks, but you won't know if there's a big hole or a monster or bugs, cockroaches. You don't know unless you touch them. Darkness, scary. In our world, we don't really know what total darkness is. Many of us hasn't really been in a place of absolute absence of light. My father once took me down into the gold mine tunnels. If you switch the little headlamp off, then you know what darkness is. But this was another kind of darkness because light did not come into existence yet. So the measure of darkness, the depth of darkness that we are looking at cannot be imagined today. Light had not manifested yet. Not in this place. And last week, I'm picking up where we ended off last week, said that God had already decided, formulated, imagined in his mind, inside of himself. He had prepared to put light into its proper place. So when God, when the moment came, when Yahweh spoke, let there be light, it had been formed and perfected inside of his mind, in his heart, inside of him. It's part of his own character. Light of the making of Yahweh. Light's origin is in him. So then he speaks these words. Because his spirit, it says his spirit. Let's read it. It says, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Can you put that on the screen for us on Bible Hub? We're going to look at the original Hebrew. Because before we look further at light, There was something else. There was a formless planet, earth. There was something. There was darkness. The Spirit was hovering above it, upon it, in context to it. And then it gives us another piece of information, hovering upon the waters. So we all imagine, first you go like, what is nothingness? What is chaotic? What is formless? Then they put water in there and you go like, okay, I can imagine an ocean. That helps. So now we imagine an entire planet that was just covered in water. And it's sensible to do that. It's not unreasonable to imagine water. It's not unreasonable at all to imagine water. What if today, what if I came to you and said, imagine light? What would your brain have to do? Wat is stappe van vergelyking in Engels? Degrees. So if I said to you, imagine light, you would probably fumble around a little bit in your mind and go like, what do I do? And you go like, maybe I should do degrees of comparison. And then imagine a brighter light than the one you started off with, isn't it? Because imagining light is not possible. Unless we add something to what I'm asking of you. I say imagine light, you have an absolute concept of light. You cannot imagine it. You cannot use your imagination for something that's already absolute. Try imagining light without using degrees of comparison. Try. To imagine light, you're either going to have to switch the lights off first, imagine darkness, and then imagine light, or you're going to have to dim the light and then make it brighter, or you're going to have to go from the light that you did think of and go to another degree, because imagining something that is already absolute isn't possible. Can you feel your brain? Sometimes we learn by really looking at what the brain has to do. And when you stop your brain from using degrees of comparison, and you are not allowed to use darkness to imagine light, then there's nothing. There's only what you know. And if you know, you cannot imagine. Jean-Pierre, is it making sense? If you know, it becomes impossible to imagine. If you have to imagine, it means you do not yet know. Now go home after this and see if you can prove that theory wrong. So I think I've come up with an absolute theory. If you absolutely know, then it's absolutely impossible to imagine. And if you still have the capacity to imagine, it means you don't absolutely know. What would that theory expose or teach us regarding our faith walk? If we applied the theory to our relationship with Yahweh, what could we possibly learn about ourselves? If we applied that theory to salvation, is there something we could discover? If we applied that theory to grace, that which we absolutely know can no longer be imagined, and imagination could no longer be applied or used in connection to what is absolutely known. And that which is not absolutely known can still be imagined. What if we took this theory, this test, and we applied it to grace, faith? Yahweh himself, the Son of God on the cross, the resurrection. You only know that you truly know when you can no longer imagine. So we can work towards a perfect existence of knowing. That's good news, isn't it? Okay. Can you put that on the screen for me, please? So now we have a bit of information. God created the earth and the heavens. The other information we have is that it's void without form. I can do nothing with that. But then they mention water, and I'm back on track. I can do something with that. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And the Hebrew word there is ham-mime. Now the Hebrew word for water is mime. Just mime. If a Hebrew person says, I want a glass of water, he says a glass of mime. But it's not just mime, it's ham-mime. But can you go and see what the meaning could possibly be in Strong's for mime? Okay, you'll have to, yeah. Now you see, yes, do that. Becomes more of a mystery. But there's a Hebrew word for the ham, an original, and it means hot or warm, any degree of hot or warm unto boiling. So we have a very hot earth. And water there, mime, doesn't yet have the meaning of HO2. It just means fluid. The meaning here at this point is fluid. Any fluid. And that's why when you look at what it says on the previous page, it doesn't say water as the meaning of mime. A mime is something that's fluid, but it's also hot fluid. Now this, we know about the earth. That under the crust, very hot and fluid. And if we look at when a volcano erupts, that would be a very good description of formless and chaotic hot lava. Nothing else exists in the presence of hot lava, does it? What can exist together with hot lava? What can share space with hot lava? There can be consequences. As far as I know, nothing can share its existence with hot lava. So the earth, being without form, chaotic, fluid, but hot fluid. So when we see water here, it's not even possible that it can be water the way that we think it should be. Later, things are going to change a bit. Now, why is this important? Because Yahweh has not yet spoken. But He's present. He has arrived. A single-celled organism cannot come into random existence on a planet that is lava. So God speaks, and He doesn't say, cool it, so that life can come into existence. We know there's a spiritual law, and this law comes from the very reality that God Himself, Yahweh Himself, calls Himself the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And because He identifies Himself as that, when He comes into the place, He comes according to that law. So when God finally speaks, He utters the words, let there be light. Let there be light. So we have all started our walk of faith having a random concept of this, let there be light. God is speaking one of His own characteristics into the situation. One of His own characteristics is spoken into this situation, and why is that important? Becomes extremely important because in 1 John, let's go to the book, the letter, the epistle 1 John, chapter 1, verse 5. 1 John, first epistle of John, chapter 1, verse 5. John declares, and he sees this is important enough to write it down. Says, this is the message which we have heard from Him and declared to you, that Yahweh is light, and in Him is no darkness at all. So it's not a theory when I say that it's one of the greatest characteristics of God that we see in the creation act. Because I don't think any man existed except for the Son Yahushua Himself that knew God better than John. And John says that this is the message that he has received, and it's so important that he has now declared and written down, and we declare this to you. In other words, it's important. He says, we receive this message and we want you to know it's what we're going to preach. So John would go around and preach a message. One of his greatest sermons for John, the apostle, would be, God is light and in Him is no darkness. God is light and in Him is no darkness. That must be important somehow. See, we have our concepts of light. Light is connected to goodness, virtue, and darkness now carries this idea of evil, that which is not good, not pure. It's a matter of fact, even the accuser of the brethren is accused of being dark, described as darkness. Sin is very often equated with darkness. Danger is very often equated with darkness. I can't think of a negative connotation to light. Can you? Only Satan that sees light as a threat. As a matter of fact, the Bible says that light is that which exposes, reveals. In the act of creation, in the beginning, first thing that God does is He speaks light into existence. And I hope that you've been meditating upon something that was said last week, and that was that it was premeditated, pre-decided, preconceived. He didn't just speak about light because there was darkness and He wanted to work and needed some light to see. He didn't just speak about light because He wanted to do something about the darkness. Light itself was preconceived and in pre-existence inside of Him. And it is equated with His character, His person. Because John says God is a light. And there is no darkness in Him. But light was in Him. And we have no record of light existing outside of Him. Up until this moment. Why is this important? Let's go to the book of Revelation, chapter 21. The book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 23 says this about the New Jerusalem. It says, the city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. The Lamb is its light. There's a spiritual law that becomes a spiritual law because of what Yahweh says about Himself. Yahweh says this about Himself to let us know something about what is. He says, I am the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. He makes a point throughout the scriptures to be known in this way. Him being the beginning and the end at all times is as good as His name. It's as important as His name itself. Him always having been, will be, and is at all times, the beginning and the end at all times. You cannot encounter Yahweh for a moment in prayer without encountering the beginning and the end of your life. You cannot encounter Yahweh in prayer for a single split second without encountering the beginning and the end of all things. You cannot encounter Yahweh. In prayer or worship, or when you're seeking even for a moment, without encountering Yahweh as the beginning and the end of all that has ever been, or is, or will be. All at the same time. He is the beginning and the end. He is the Alpha and the Omega. Not sometimes, not in theory, not only when he speaks. He is the beginning and the end. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is always, all the time, every time, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. He has never not been the beginning and the end. He shall always be the beginning and the end. All that he has ever said will always be the beginning and the end. All he has ever done has always been the beginning and the end. He is always the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. When God, through His Spirit, hovered upon that which was fluid and hot and without form and void, without meaning or life or future or value in itself, when He said, "Let there be light," He was in that moment, and He's always in that moment, the beginning and the end. When He said, "Let there be light," the light that is in the city Jerusalem came into existence. And because it's in existence, and it is Yahushua, it has never not been in existence. There cannot be the creation moment where the beginning and the end says, "Let there be light," without the reality of the light shining in the New Jerusalem as the light to us. Upon this foundation, all things exist. This truth, this reality, is fundamental to your faith and mine. It's fundamental to how you faith. The reality of the beginning and the end always, always, always being Yahweh. The reality of when He said, "Let there be light," that the existence of the eternal light, giving light to the city, that reality having to be real always is fundamental to faith. Because we know that in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1, Paul introduces us to the reality that even the faith of Abraham was based upon the eternal city. Why is this important in this series that we are doing? God always had in mind a church that was in full and perfect unity. God always had in mind His body according to His Son, who is the light of the world. That's the thing about light. It is just light. That is why we cannot imagine light without going to steps of increases or decreases. It is very important to understand that He always had in mind a church that was in perfect unity, perfectly one. Perfect. It is almost redundant for us to speak about perfect unity. He had already described His bride as perfect. It is almost redundant for us to have to preach or teach on unity. If it was not for His Son, we still considered it worthwhile to pray about us being one, then it would be redundant for us to have the thought. Almost like it is impossible to imagine light. This is what he did in the beginning. When he said, "Let there be light," the end was written and finalized. He's always the beginning and the end. He cannot be anything else, anyone else, or any other way. Why is it important for us? What can we learn out of that? Part of our conforming to him has to be doing away with everything in between. Our great obstacle is that we want a process between beginning and end. We have been convinced that we deserve such a process. We should have such a process. We should embrace such a process. We should get to understand the process. When he showed us, what have we learned? That before he said, he had finalized what it would be. When he said it, it came into being and it was good. But it determined finality. If there was no light eternally in the city, then the light in the beginning could not be. Creation would not be. Order would not be. It's complicated when at first you look at it. But it's not complicated. When you have first seen it. What does it mean for you as an individual? How do we practically start to implement it? A mindset of single-mindedness. Light was light. No further explanation needed. This is part of his character. It is part of his character, and it is how he identifies himself in the Bible, Old Testament and New. As a matter of fact, his son arrives a few years later on earth. Surprisingly, he identifies himself, announces himself as exactly the same. I am the light of the world. And the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness could not comprehend it, could not overcome it, could not see. Now we go back to what have we done so far in this series. The menorah that Marizan brought and taught us about. It's his confirming of his original intent and the great act of supremacy over all things right in the beginning. That's the menorah. A menorah becomes a reminder, a representative in time of the light that will burn in the city. But the menorah, more than anything else, represents the church. The menorah is there to represent the church. The book of Revelation makes that extremely clear. The menorah, more than that, represents the Holy Spirit on earth, who was hovering And he spoke and said, "Let there be light." The Holy Spirit is represented in a dark tabernacle as the light of creation, the light of revelation. The light of salvation. How does this pertain to you as a believer? When the menorah was no more the representative of those things, the tongues of fire came upon the heads of the believers, that is the church. Individual believers becoming the church and the body, now becoming the representative. The representative on earth of the creation, of revelation, and of salvation. Not sometimes. When you said yes at the cross, and when he drew near according to his call, when he drew near according to his call and accepted your yes in baptism water, confirmed your resurrection by the outpouring of the light, your state of being became the beginning and end at all times. Your state of being became the Alpha and Omega at all times. All of his word, all the time. Not sometimes, all the time. All of his finished work, all the time, every time. So when he said, he is the light of the world, we can go, Lord, we believe it, you're good, you're virtuous, you're all powerful, you are sinless, you are the one who died on the cross, you are the one who is resurrected. But when he, right after that, said to his disciples, you are the light of the world, what does that mean? What did he say? What does that mean to us? And can we fully embrace and understand that? It's not just words. It's not just words. That's exactly what he said and the intent behind it. It's mind-boggling. The intent behind him saying to his disciples, you are the light of the world. Do not hide the light under the bed. Put the light on a high place. What light? Don't let your mind go to steps of. What light? The light that he had in mind when he looked at the darkness, when he looked at the void and he said, let there be light. That light. Because that light has to absolutely equal the light that is shining in the midst of the city, giving light to all. The intent of him who is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. The intent was clear from the beginning. Clear and made clear. Can't make a point more clear than taking complete darkness and then putting complete light in it. That's making a point very clear. The intent was the same from the beginning. The intent was made very clear in the tabernacle, very clear in the temple. The intent was made exceedingly clear on the day of Pentecost. And the intent can never be less than what it says in the book of Revelation. When the bride, the city, comes down from Yahweh, and it has no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, because I'm going to be there. It doesn't need the light of the sun, because Monet, to the rescue, will be shining brightly in its midst. And I can say that it's not blasphemy, because I am in Messiah and my life is hidden in Him. Now, just like the Carter effect that we find between the first act of creation in Genesis, the Carter effect we find between the first act, creation in Genesis, and the light shining in the city in Revelation. Remember, nothing in the Bible happens without the Carter effect. Nothing starts without there being an point B on the other side. Nothing in the Bible. So now here I am on earth, resurrected, representative of creation, revelation, and salvation. Me, the Alpha and the Omega. Or do we not believe in eternity mindset? See, we are still scared, bashful, even shy, hesitant. Just acknowledge what the Bible is saying about us. It says the same things about us than what it says about Him. It said, He is the light. It says, you are the light. It says, He's shining in the midst of the city. He is the light, but I'm in Him, and He's shining upon us, and He's shining right now in the church upon each other. He took the flame, the light, and He made it into a menorah. One, but shining with more than one light. So we are busy with the series focused on unity in the body. Unity is not a concept, it's not a value system. Unity is not an ideal. Unity is literally expressed by light in the Bible. And the thing about light is that it removes darkness. Unity in the church cannot be expressed in our thinking as an ideal, a hope, a concept, a belief system, a doctrine, a religion. It cannot, because that is contrary to what it is expressed as in the Bible, Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, light. So for us to work towards that unity, as individuals in ourselves, in our thinking, we need to inevitably embrace the all or nothing attitude. I've been thinking about this from every angle, looking at it from every possible conceivable angle, and the answer remains the same. How do human beings embrace totality? extremity. That's our challenge. Is he? Yeah, we read it. We read the body is one. How do you look at that and not fracture it into something else in order to understand it? So we have no option. We have no choice. We have no other possibility but to embrace what it says. One. Nothing in between me and that one truth. There's nothing. There's no steps of how do we look at one and not have steps or degrees of something in between? How do we avoid that? That's the challenge we're looking at. That's what we're staring in the face by doing a series like this. And then we present this challenge to each other. To be one with each other. If you, as my brother or sister, are walking 10% of the way that you should, and I want to be one with you, should I go to 10%? If you, as a brother or sister, are unwilling to embrace ultimate standard, and I want to be one with you, then how do I not embrace less than an ultimate standard? So he confronts us with this seemingly straightforward concept. Unity. But when you cast your eyes upon your own heart, your own thinking, your own will, if an honest person had to look at own will, own heart, own thoughts, own life, own doing, own wanting, then we are confronted with so many steps, so many decisions that are opposite to just unity. So we have to conclude that when God said this, he forgot that we are humans. We have to conclude that he made a mistake, and or maybe he didn't mean it. And I'm not saying this with a negative attitude. I'm saying this, I'm with you, looking at a challenge that seems to be almost beyond us. And if I didn't truly believe that what he starts has been finished, I truly believe that. There's no part of me that doesn't believe it, because I see it absolutely in the Bible. How could it be that the menorah in the tabernacle could be such a perfect picture of everything that came before and everything that happened subsequently in the church? And we know that his intention is in the end of time to fulfill. But it's one thing to believe that he will fulfill it, he will perform his word. It's another thing when I realize that the only way that his word will be performed is through me. I'm the obstacle. I'm the outstanding bit of the perfection. Me. If I want to look at why is it not completely fulfilled yet, I end up with one answer. It's obviously me. I'm not in full unity with everybody that came before me and with everything that exists in eternity. I'm not talking even about people that are with me on the earth. The question is, what needs to be done? What needs to be done in me to absolutely align me with everyone that's looking at me from the city, Well, no, we're just waiting for you. Paul, Abraham, Noah, all the saints that has died for the truth of the witness of the resurrection, all those that has come after me, all those that died in the persecution at the end of time, all those that are to be killed by the beast, all of them are looking at me and going, come on, Monet. And I'm going like, I think you've got the wrong guy. No, God doesn't make mistakes. I'm the right guy. But we have to put in the work, challenge ourselves, embrace the change. Embrace the change. And the change isn't that difficult, actually. So it's a matter of removing everything that's just not part of the absolute. Does that scare any of us? The thought of removing everything in me that's not part of the absolute. Is there any part of you that's a little bit scared? We don't like the idea of having sin taken away from us. We don't like the idea of not being asleep half the time. Why does it scare us so much to be awake? Why does it scare us to have to pay attention all the time? Why does it scare us? Why does taking responsibility have such an intense effect on us? We can't really speak about unity without speaking about these things. Let's get to Isaiah chapter 55. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 11. I'll read from verse 10. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 10. For as the rain comes down, and the snow from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth and make it bring forth and bud, that it may give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please. His word that goes forth from his mouth shall accomplish what pleases him, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I send it. His word. So, brothers, sisters, beloved, when he spoke and said, "Let there be light," the words went through time and space and connected with the sun risen, sitting on his throne in the midst of the city, giving light to the city. The words, as it was spoken, became the beginning and end of all things. In between, there is no variation. There cannot be. We are called, we are taught by him in this day, the Spirit speaking to the church, to embrace the process of repenting from our mindset of variation being possible or even acceptable. It's a higher call, Spirit speaking to us in this manner, saying, how do you as a generation in your time consider it acceptable in the eyes of Yahweh for there be to be a variation between the light that is spoken into being and the light that is eternally in the midst of the city, how can the light in your time be different? If you are the church. The word church, the church, has to equal the light in the beginning and the end at all times, if there is to be a church. I'm not speaking to you and saying you should do it. I'm saying that's just the truth. And I'm under that truth. We are all to be placed under directly in a position of accountability and responsibility for that church, for that truth. The church at all time, if there is to be a true church, should equal the light in the beginning and the light in the end. Be no less, without shadow of turning. Let's go back to the book of Genesis. Chapter 1. Verse 4. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God saw the light, that it was good. What was it that God was looking at? And God said, let there be light. And he looked at something, looked at someone. The Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, looked at the light and said it was good. And he divided the light from the darkness. Our only hope to be His church, if we continue to move the boundaries that constrains our minds to time and binds it to the concepts of the restraints of time. The only hope we have as a church to be the church is if we will continue to strain and bear forward in this hope. He looked at the light, and He was good, and is good. And He divided the darkness from the light. There's only one place where the darkness and the light is divided, and that's the cross. There's only one ultimate place where darkness itself is defeated, separated, and the absolute light that is ruling and reigning in eternity. There's only one place where the darkness is fully removed from the light. And He looked at the light, and He was good. He is good. It is in that effort to see our minds set free from the restraints of time and space, from the steps of progression in between that keeps us from understanding, It's in that the hope of the unity and the perfection of the church lies. But it lies in that hope today. The hope exists today because the work is finished. When he spoke the light into existence, the exact same moment, light and darkness was removed. Without the cross, that could not be true. Without the resurrection, it could not be true. Without you resurrected, it could not be true. I'm hoping that we have put another bit of substance in place for you when it comes to eternity mindset. So we cast our view back to the days of the tabernacle. I'm hoping that you are growing in your ability to perceive the menorah. And the menorah was good every day of its existence. And the foolish part of me wants to desire in some way to have been there when Pentecost happened. That's the foolish part of me. This is not 1%, it's lacking in me. I'm received no less. I'm responsible for no less. I'm capable of no less. What happens if you are to put the same expectation that you would have had on those that were there for the first outpouring? Those who came out on the roof that day, what's your expectation of them? What is your expectation of them for the next day? What would you expect those people to be after the outpouring of the Holy Spirit and the flames of fire being lit above their heads? What is your, or would your expectation to be of them? A week later, a month later, 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, what would your expectation be of one of those people when you met them? What would you expect them to be? I'd say almost an unreasonably high expectation. I would encounter one of them and I would expect such exceeding wisdom. It's a matter of fact, if I met Thomas, I would expect him to be able to explain and teach the gospel to me perfectly. If I met him after a year, I would not have any expectation that he would not be able to fully and clearly witness to me of the resurrection. I would not even consider there could be a possibility that he wouldn't be absolutely able to do so. What would your expectation be? Would your expectation when you heard that one of the disciples that was there on the roof, when you heard that one of them were close by and you came there, would you expect them to say, I'm busy right now with other things, come back next week? Would you expect miracles from them? I would. Would you expect to see the sick healed if one of them were around? I would. If I came, to be honest, if I came to Jerusalem 5 years later and I knew that some of them were living Jerusalem, I'd go to the church in the morning and I'd kind of expect them to be around preaching or praying for people. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? I would expect any of them to be able to teach me how to do church. As a matter of fact, I wish I could go ask them. There'd be someone that could teach us how. The light has become dim upon the earth. Somehow, darkness returned. And if it's not for what you're going to do with the rest of your life, if it wasn't for that, I would say there's a good chance that darkness could return altogether upon the earth. The water is the other thing that's going to happen. So remember that the water there was something fluid and hot, not necessarily water as we know it. What's the other characteristic that it's going to put in place? See, life needs two things, light and water, and then life is possible. In the absence of light and water, life's not possible. You can have darkness, but you need to have water. Then there can be life, but not the full expression of life. If you have no water and no light, life is not possible. So Yahweh expresses his characteristic that he has inside of him, and that's light. The Bible says that he is light. There's no darkness in him. He is light. He expresses that. Next thing he's going to do is he's going to separate the water from the water. So whatever there was chaotic and formless, couldn't sustain life. Life was impossible. So the next characteristic he's going to express is water. And his son says he's the light, and then he also speaks about himself as the living water. Connects the 2 points of Kata perfectly. Because where do we find the living water? Book of Revelation again. He takes what is considered to us, by us, as perfect. We know heaven based on a few things. When you think of heaven, do you ever think of a dark place where you're walking around with a candle? We inevitably identify heaven as heaven based on a few things. It's light. It's beautiful. There's rainbow colors everywhere. There's water. I cannot think of heaven and see a desert. Not possible. Even if I tell myself try, nope, not going to happen. There's the living water gushing through. Everything is green and lively. And the Lord is in its midst. Those are the things that has to be a part of heaven. Whatever idea of heaven we have, now that I've learned about the New Jerusalem and us being New Jerusalem and being Messiah, now of course I just have a general expectation of all of us. Why should any idea of the beginning... See, the beginning has to have all those aspects, otherwise the beginning is not the beginning. So first he puts light in place. Now, aspect of eternity has come into the beginning. Then he puts water in place. Ding. We put that on Bible Hub. We're going to look at this, and this is the final bit of what we're talking about today. It seemed much shorter in my head when I did it. Okay, let's see. So once he separated the darkness and night, it was the first day. Verse 6, then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And let it divide the waters from the waters. Verse 6 in Genesis. It seems like there's not too much of a revelation to be had there. We're used to the idea there was water everywhere, and then he separates water from water so that there can be a space in between, and now we have an atmosphere. So either it was very hot water or lava, or a combination of it. We don't know what was there before. But we do know that he replaces the darkness with light, separates darkness and light, and now he does something with whatever was flowing on the earth. It was fluid, without form, and not prone to form or order. Then he separates them as well. And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters. The first waters is still Hammaim. So it's still the hot water. Very important. To separate the Maim from the Lammaim. So the first water is still Hammaim. Then he said it's in order to separate the Maim, that is still the word for water today, from the Lammaim. And what is Lammaim? Only one occurrence of Lammaim in the Bible. Unknown word that today has no meaning that can be discerned or discovered. So what we do know is Maim, because that's what we have today. Something phenomenal happened here. Because we need Maim to have life, together with light. And the Maim had to be separated from the Lammaim. And only one occurrence in the Bible. A lost word. Something that the Bible never explains again because it was separated from the Maim. It would take many a decade before humans discovered the rest of the story again. Well, that's what I think it means. But we know something. Not only did he put water above, he also changed whatever was happening on the surface. So that together with light, water could now become the definition of life. The beginning of the Bible is now absolutely lined up and in line with the end of the story in the Bible. And the middle. So, when it comes to Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, that's something that we are going to emphasize over the course of this year in our quest for greater oneness and unity. Oneness, I've said this since the first days of this ministry. It's one of the reasons why I changed course in my walk. True oneness cannot be achieved within compromise. True oneness, by its very nature, has to be sought. If we're going to look for it, if we're going to find it, it has to be found in truth, the purity of truth. It's not possible to see in the church a correlation between the beginning and end as we see it in the Bible. It's not possible to see it without perfect truth. But teaching perfect truth is not going to do it. Knowing perfect truth is not really going to do it. It'll be a step closer. Exclusion of everything that's not truth, that's what's going to do it. Removing the other factors. Just like he removed darkness from light. That's the only way it's going to ever happen or work. The thing is that tremendous process has to happen in every individual. And that's what he's been doing in each one of us. He's separating the light and the darkness. Separating the hot lava from the water. We'll leave it at that. So, amen until next week when we'll continue with the rest of this discovery.